Okay, people are popping in, I think. Yep. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. Cool. We can go ahead and kind of get started here as people are kind of filtering in. For those of you that have been here before, welcome back. Anybody that's new, we're going to be talking about some digital marketing tracking tools in KPIs today. My name is Colton. I am a SME with SCORE with digital marketing. So excited to kind of get into this today. This is probably going to be, of the series that we've done so far, this is definitely going to be the most technical of the three. So please don't feel like you're out of place if you're kind of lost as we're going through this. This is going to be a lot of information, on the kind of the technical setup end of, website management in general. So you'll probably feel like there's a lot being thrown at you at one time, but that's totally okay. This is really just to kind of give you an idea of like where you can go with tracking. And there's a ton of resources out on the web that can help you figure out how to actually do a lot of this stuff. Plus, you can also hire outside firms and consultants to do some of the setup work too for a fairly reasonable price. So, so feel free to kind of follow along here. Like I said, we're going to be talking about tools, KPIs to maximize ROI. So learning goals for this one, we're going to be learning about the tools that you really need to be able to measure digital marketing success. So we've talked about, the different channels you can get into, the different strategies you can do. Now we're going to be talking again a little bit more about how you actually measure the success of those strategies. We're going to know a little bit about the basic KPIs or key performance indicators of digital marketing investment, how to benchmark that. So you can kind of figure out, hey, like, am I on the right track here? I see these numbers, but am I doing well? Am I doing poorly? And then also locate those KPIs within those analytics tools that we're going to be covering today as well. So again, kind of circling back, this has been our main theme throughout the entire series. Everything kind of done within the lens of the marketing funnel, right? So really, we've talked a lot about strategy here and how we're targeting these different parts of the funnel. But with this series, we're really talking about, well, how do we even determine where people are in the funnel, and how do we determine if our strategies are effective at certain parts of the funnel, and so on. So this is kind of like how the marketing funnel kind of fits into this presentation. So tools of the trade. These are really the main sort of marketing analytics tools that are out there for digital marketing. We have Google Analytics, we have Google Tag Manager, we have Google Ads, and then we have Google Data Studio. All Google products. There are a number of other analytics tools that are outside of Google, of course. These are just kind of like the market leaders in terms of what most of the industry is using. And they're generally the most user-friendly as well, which is part of the reason why they're, kind of the market leaders on these analytics tools. So starting off with Google Tag Manager, this one's, if you might have heard Google Analytics, I'm sure you've probably heard Google Ads before, but Google Tag Manager is probably one you haven't heard of before, unless you're kind of more into website development and things like that. Google Tag Manager is really an all-in-one tag management platform that Google's created. So what this allows you to do is basically manage, create, edit all of your website tags all in one place. You can do measurement codes here, you can do website integrations, you can do tracking. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with the Google Tag Manager that really kind of beefs up your ability to track your progress with your digital marketing strategies. You don't need a ton of technical proficiency to make this work. The interface that Google set up for Google Tag Manager is fairly straightforward. There's not a whole lot of coding that you'd have to do necessarily. But really the main thing is what is even a tag and a trigger, right? Or what is Google Tag Manager actually doing here? So the main thing that you can do with Google Tag Manager is you can actually install this on your site, and then you can use a tag and trigger combination to set up different tracking mechanisms, different actions that happen on your website. So pretty much the most common way of doing this is actually installing Google Analytics through Google Tag Manager. What that does is allows you to keep all your installations all in kind of one neat little container. So think of your tag as kind of like the action or the integration code that you're wanting to fire on a page. So when somebody comes to the page, you want analytics to make sure that they're tracking that person that comes on that page. So that's your tag. That's what needs to fire. And then the trigger is what causes that tag to fire. So the trigger in that example of using analytics to decide where or to pick up that person that has visited your website, the trigger there is going to be them, the action of them viewing the page. So when they come to the page loads on their screen, the trigger will fire from Google Tag Manager, or the trigger will fire the tag from Google Tag Manager, which is your actual analytics code that tracks the user itself. So that's kind of like the most basic example of how that works. Again, there's a ton of stuff you can do outside of that with Google Tag Manager. You can install certain website code to do some different things, for SEO optimization. You can fire different tracking codes, like from Facebook. You can do Facebook pixel tracking codes through Google Tag Manager as well. There's just a ton of stuff that you can do with this. So it's a really good tool to get familiar with. I know I'm probably speaking a different language to some of you that might not be as into web development, but again, there's a lot of resources out here that can help you kind of get familiar with this as well. But this is a great place to kind of start sort of building your tracking systems for your website. So as far as installing this goes, step one, you got to go to tagmanager.google.com to start your account. So you're basically gonna sign in with a Google account, and you'll create something called a container, which is, again, the house for all of your tags and your triggers. Once you have that container set up, it's going to ask you to copy and paste some installation code on your website. So this part is a little bit more on the developer end. So if you're not super familiar with code, or you feel like you might break your website, that's okay. A lot of times there's plugins and different apps that will do that for you, so that you don't have to get into your website code to actually paste that. But if you do feel more comfortable with it, if you're a little bit more familiar with HTML markup, you can go and paste this code. It goes in two places. It's at the top of the head tag, and then right after the opening body tag. And that allows those tags and triggers to kind of work on your website. You can test to see if this is working by using the Google Chrome add-on called Tag Assistant. So once you have this set up and you have Tag Assistant in your Google Chrome browser, you basically can fire that up, enable that assistant, go to your site, and it will tell you what tags are firing on your website, Google Tag Manager being one of those. So that way you can just double check to make sure that it's installed correctly. So moving on from Google Tag Manager, we're going to move over to Google Analytics. Analytics is a website analytics tracking program. So once you get Google Tag Manager set up, you can install Google Analytics through Google Tag Manager. You can also just install analytics directly on your site if you choose as well. This tracks everything that happens on your website, and of the tools that we're going to talk about today is probably the one you would end up spending the most time in. This is where all of the data is going to be, as far as what changes are occurring in the data based on the optimizations on the site that you've made, or content additions you've made, or whatever it might be. This tracks everything that happens on your website, traffic, where it came from, user behavior on the site. Are they spending time on the page? Are they visiting multiple pages while they're on your site? Are they just visiting one page and bouncing away? If they performed a desired action, you're basically setting up conversion actions on Google Analytics. So if somebody fills out a contact form or clicks a call button or whatever it might be, you can track that separately, so you can see, hey, this amount of people actually converted or filled out a lead form or called me versus how many people actually came to the site. You can view demographic and device information, geographic information, and a whole lot more on Google Analytics. So definitely, again, of the tools that we're talking about today, analytics is probably the most important and also the one that you'll spend the most time in if you do get it set up. It's really the key to understanding your digital marketing strategy and investment. So again, this is going to allow you to see what changes are occurring on your site from what your strategy is. So if you're adding content onto the site, you can see if you're getting visits to that page or how that page is influencing people actually doing what you want them to do, whether it's buying something, again, contact forms, calls, whatever it might be. You can see if they're engaged with the content that you're posting on the site, and kind of measure that change over time so you can really get a true understanding of what is going to be the best use of my time in terms of digital marketing, and also what strategies tend to work best for my vertical and my particular setup. So installing this, like I mentioned, there's really two ways you can do it. You can install directly on the site, or you can install through Google Tag Manager. Also, one thing to be aware of on Google Analytics is that there's currently two versions of Google Analytics that are available to you. Number one is Universal Analytics, or UA. This is on its way out. They're going to be sunsetting this, I would say, probably within the next 2-3 years, maybe. And then there's GA4, which is their newest version of Google Analytics. The difference between these two options of Google Analytics is that UA is really based on sort of page view tracking. So people coming to the site and looking at a page, it sort of just tracks that side of things. GA4 is almost solely event-based tracking. So it's really tracking when somebody interacts with certain elements of your site rather than just looking at a page. But the problem with that kind of transition is that with GA4, there's a lot of gaps in the way that works. They're trying to build that up. So UA is still available at this point for that. For UA, you can, again, do this through Google Tag Manager, or you can just copy and paste the tracking code into the head tag of the site. And again, there's some plugins and tools that can do that for you if you're not comfortable with HTML. If you do have an e-commerce site, analytics is extra important to install, but it's also infinitely more complicated when you do have an e-commerce setup. Again, there are some tools out there that can help you set that up. I would probably recommend getting a developer involved for that one. But if you just have a basic lead gen site, something like that, it's pretty straightforward to install. GA4, the best way to install it is with Google Tag Manager. There's a specific tag that you can put in that all you have to do is just put your account number in, and then it will fire that tag for you right into GA4 so that you're tracking right away. So it is a little bit more simple to set up, but again, there's some gaps in the way that it works. So they're kind of running them side by side right now for Google Analytics. So other tools that are out there that we're covering here, Google Ads. This doesn't require any special installation, but you can install conversion tags through Google Tag Manager. So when you set up a Google Ads account and you're running search ads, there's no installation that you have to do on the site like we did with Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics. But there are these tags called conversion tags, which allow you to track a little bit more accurately when somebody clicks an ad, how they're getting to that conversion stage. And that's something you can do through Google Tag Manager. Again, they have a user interface there that's very friendly. So all you really have to do is select the Google Ads conversion tag option, just fill out the form, and then you're pretty much good to go. Google Data Studio is Google's data visualization program. So what's nice about Google Data Studio is that you basically can take the information that you have on all these different platforms and then consolidate it into one location so that you're not having to go 7 different places to see how you're doing. You can also blend data sources in and create pretty much a one-stop report for yourself that really tracks the most important KPIs for you. There's no installation required for that one either, but you will need to set up a data connection. So again, you're importing data from these other platforms. So you'll have to connect your Google Analytics account, your Google Ads account if you have one, any other kind of platform that you're using. You can connect that into Google Data Studio as well. So that's really the only like technical part of that. But again, it's just really setting up the reports that you can see and track your progress over time. And like I mentioned at the beginning, there's plenty of other tracking tools that exist for different platforms. But the tools that we talked about today are kind of like the core grouping of things that will really get you what you need in order to be able to measure your progress. I know for e-commerce sites, especially like Shopify, their CMS or content management system comes with analytics basically installed natively into it. So you can see, traffic and revenue driven and all that in Shopify as well. There's just some things beyond that Google Analytics can provide. So again, I'd still recommend installing analytics if you do have a Shopify site. And there's some other CMSs that do have some version of analytics natively on that platform. But again, the analytics definitely provides like an extra layer of information that a lot of those platforms don't. So, regardless of the site you have, I definitely recommend at least installing Google Analytics. But again, you can do a lot of fancy things with Google Tag Manager as well. So moving on from tools and getting into key performance indicators. So again, we've talked about strategies, we've talked about how to measure that, or at least, what tools can measure it. Now that we have that set up and we have the data, what are we looking at? There's a lot of data that's going to come in. What should I be looking at in order to determine, how we're doing? So kind of the best way to think about this is to think about what your strategy is, right? So there's different KPIs for different types of strategies. So starting with search engine optimization, and this applies for pretty much every other channel as well. These are kind of like your core grouping of KPIs. Number one, your users and sessions. So number one question I get about analytics is, what's the difference between users and sessions? Users just means individual users, or individual visitors rather, and sessions means the number of the actual visits. So me as Colton am one user, but if I visit the site 2 times, that's 2 sessions. What you want to see here is if this is increasing year over year, you're kind of accounting for seasonality that way. If you're having kind of steady incremental growth on a year over year basis, then you're kind of moving in the right direction as far as traffic goes. Obviously, if you're going to be brand new, starting, you're installing Google Analytics for the first time in your site, you're not going to have past data. So there's nothing to compare to year over year. For that first year, I'd just kind of recommend tracking the progress month over month. It's not ideal because you're not really accounting for seasonality, especially like if you're, for example, like if you're in a business that does something with swimming pools, right? Like your summer months are crazy and then your winter months are really low. So you're going to see like a massive decrease from the summer to the winter. But as long as you're keeping that in mind, that's okay until you get that year over year data build up. And then you can kind of really compare and see how you're doing at certain times of the year. The other thing to check out here is your bounce rate. Your bounce rate is really just a measure of when somebody comes to your site for the, as their first entry, are they going to other pages of the site, or are they hitting the back button and leaving your site immediately before doing anything else? And that action is called a bounce. So this is the percentage of people that are bouncing from your site. If that's less than 80%, you're in a pretty solid position. If it's more than 80%, there's probably something on your site that is not lining up with user intent, that maybe it's not loading fast enough. There's a number of different things that can be, but a lot of the time it's something related to the user experience itself. So if they're coming into the site and bouncing off immediately more than 80% of the time, there's probably something wrong with the user experience. Pages per session. So this is the amount of pages being visited by a user every time they visit. On average, you're going to want to kind of shoot for between 1 and 2 pages per session. What that means is, they're visiting, around 2 pages every time they visit the site. Average session duration, this is again the amount of time they're actually spending on the site per session. Again, you want this between 1 and 2 minutes, or 60 to 120 seconds as it's measured. And then your goal conversion rate, if you can get that around 2%, you're in a solid position. Now, keep in mind that this depends on your conversion actions themselves. So like when I say 2%, I'm really talking about like high value conversion actions. So things like contact forms where it's an actual lead going to your sales team or to you, or a phone call or something like that, versus something like a, like a coupon download or something like that. The conversion rate is going to be much higher. But it's not necessarily going to be like a hard lead or something like that. So when I say 2%, I'm really talking about high quality leads. Moving over to pay-per-click. You're looking at a lot of the same things as you were for SEO and most other channels, but there's a couple of additional things that we need to kind of look at here. So clicks and impressions is kind of your first measure. So number one, clicks is your clicks on the ad. So every time your ad shows, somebody clicks on it, that's a click. Are they clicking on the ad in order to get to your site? Impressions is also another important one that is kind of, within the context of the clicks. So impressions is just the number of times the ad was shown on the screen. It doesn't mean they looked at it, doesn't mean they clicked on it, just means that it was on the screen and it was visible. And then your clicks is actually them clicking on it. You want to keep an eye on this. Clicks and impressions is not the end all be all of ad performance. It definitely requires context to understand what's normal for your industry, in your budget. That's going to influence how many clicks and impressions you get. What you're looking for here is if there's any like really sharp anomalies. So if your clicks are dropping off the table or your impressions are dropping off the table, then yeah, there's probably an issue with your account that you need to iron out. But if it's kind of steady and kind of moving along at a nice clip, and if you're increasing budget, it should also increase. So, you're just kind of keeping an eye on that trend and tracking that over time. Next thing is click-through rate or interaction rate, abbreviated as CTR. Ideally, your interaction or click-through rate is going to be higher than 2%. So that just means that, of the amount of impressions you receive, 2% at least of those people are clicking on the ad or interacting with the ad in some way. Conversion rate, again, ideally higher than 2%. For paid search, you do want to see this be higher than SEO. For paid search, you're really kind of targeting the bottom of the funnel people, and you're investing more money. So you really want that to be as efficient as possible. So ideally, you'd have it higher than 2% or higher than your SEO conversion rate or your organic conversion rate. But if you can get it around 2%, that's definitely solid. Conversion value, that's going to be, it's going to require a little bit of tracking setup like we've already talked about, but you're also wanting to review this with context. So if you're like an e-commerce store, for example, and you have like a very hard like number that you can track for when they make a purchase, it's much easier to kind of look at that conversion value number and say, hey, like we made X amount of dollars this month. But if you're a lead gen site and you're sort of assigning a lead value to your contact forms, you obviously can't look at that conversion value number and say, hey, we made X amount of dollars this month. That's just kind of the value of the leads that you received. So you got to think about that when you're setting that up. But it's also important to look at if you do have that conversion value sort of inputted on Google Analytics and Google Ads. And then finally, your return on ad spend. This is the most important metric of all of these that we talked about in paid search, because this is essentially your ROI. Your return on ad spend, or ROAS, is basically your conversion value over the amount of money that you spent in Google Ads. So it's really like, what did you get out of it from the investment that you put into it? So this is going to really be the thing to tell you whether or not that paid search is working for you and making you money or not. So again, it's definitely the most important of the metrics that we covered. So where do you find these KPIs? All KPIs from SEO, other channel column, the first column that we covered in the last slide, can be found in Google Analytics. all PPC KPIs can be found in Google Ads. There are some KPIs in Google Ads that can also be found in Google Analytics, which again is why Google Analytics is so important to install. And then, like I said before, with Data Studio, you can combine those platforms and just put them all in one location so that you can see at a glance what's going on, with your strategies, so that you don't have to kind of flip back and forth between programs and, try to put the pieces together. It'll all be kind of one spot for you with Google Data Studio. So here are basically kind of what universal analytics or in Google Analytics looks like. So you're going to have the channels report is kind of going to be your go-to here. This is found under the acquisition section, and then under all traffic and channels. This is going to show you exactly what channels are driving traffic and how they're performing. And then again, I have this set to like year-over-year figures for this particular profile. So like you can see here that paid search is our #1 traffic driver. And if we pop over here to goal completions, it's also our #1 lead driver as well. And there's some nice growth on that side of things year-over-year too. Now with larger growth, you're going to see some decreases in engagement metrics, which is this behavior column right here: bounce rate, pages per session, average session duration. Engagement metrics just means, kind of a measure of how engaged a user is on your website. So our bounce rate climbed about 1%, but again, that bounce rate is still at 58.25% for the whole site, which is much lower than 80%. So on the whole, we're doing pretty well there. Average pages per session dropped about 8.5%. But again, we're kind of in that sweet spot at 1.92 pages per session. So we want to be between 1 and 2. And then average session duration climbed a bit from last year. So now we're at 1 minute and almost a half for this year. So again, kind of in that sweet spot between 1 and 2 minutes. But like I said, as your traffic grows, and even the more drastically it grows, you're going to see those engagement metrics come down, and that's okay. You just want to look at the hard numbers as well to kind of get context about that. So if they're coming down, we're okay with it as long as it's not getting too crazy. If it's getting beyond 80% bounce rate, or we're getting below a page per session, or below 1 minute average session duration, then we kind of want to be more concerned about it. Your goal conversion rate is another one to keep an eye on as well. This is basically the ratio of your site sessions to goal completions. So again, the amount of people that visited the site versus the amount of people that actually converted or completed a contact form, bought something, etc. So again, you want to see where that's going as well. Generally, again, as your traffic increases for a given channel, your conversion rate will probably come down, unless you've made some sort of design change on the site that would help to foster more conversions in some way. But again, this is really should be your kind of main place to go to check on your progress. So this is the channels report in Google Analytics. And then this is a screenshot from Google Ads. So again, you'll see a little bit more information. I have some things kind of blocked out here for privacy, but you'll see the campaign name. You'll see for each campaign or each ad group, however you're granular you're looking at it, all these different metrics, right? So you can see impressions over here in the far left, your interactions, your clicks, the next column, and then that interaction rate. So this is, again, that ratio between interactions and impressions. You'll see your average cost for that campaign or that ad group, your actual cost, and then the amount of conversions you got for that campaign, the cost per conversion. So that's, again, just the cost, this column divided by this column, essentially. Your conversion rate, campaign ID is just kind of a technical thing. You don't really need to pay attention to that. But then viewable impressions and viewable impression distribution. This is not something that you need to hone in on or anything like that. I haven't even talked about it up to this point. Viewable impressions just means that the impression was the view of the ad was kind of at the top of the page. It was front and center. And then conversion value, again, if you have conversion values plugged in, so you're saying hey, this conversion is worth X dollar amount, it'll add all those conversions up for you. So you can kind of see what your, what you're either making on the e-commerce perspective or the value of the leads that you've accumulated there. And your bid strategy type here at the far right. Again, depending on what your ad setup is, you might have something different in that column, but again, you can edit that and do whatever you want to optimize that account. This is your auction insights report in Google Ads as well. This is another one that you want to check out from time to time. With auction insights, what Google's doing is compiling information about other businesses that appear in the same ad grouping as you, and then you can see how you're faring against them. So for example, for this particular account, there's not a lot of competitors that have a ton of impressions here, but this overlap rate is what you're looking at here, right? So this overlap rate is the percentage of times that the competitor in that line is appearing in the same ad group as you. So this competitor appears 0.6% of the time with us when we appear, and then all the way down to 6.3%. So you want to see, okay, how often are they appearing? And then when they are appearing, what's their position above rate, which just means the percentage of times that that advertiser is appearing above you when those ads are all laid out. And then top of page rate is when they're appearing above, or when they're appearing in the ads, what's the percentage of times they're at the top of the page. And then absolute top of page rate is when they're in spot 1. And then outranking share is the percentage of times that, again, they're outranking us for that. So again, this is a great report you can check out if you want to see a little bit about what your competitors are doing and how you're faring against your competitors within Google Ads. And here's an example of a Data Studio report. So again, we're kind of compiling all this information into one central location so we can very easily see how we're doing. So in the top there, you have just some hard numbers and kind of growth year over year. How are site users trending? This is the trend lines for both paid search and organic search versus last year, which you can see as really faint color lines that are the same color. But again, we can see trends over time. So are we moving in the right direction? Are we going up or are we going down? And then channels driving leads, we can see by channel which leads are kind of the most important for us. And then we can even break it down by city and location to see, where specifically we're doing well and where we're not doing so well. So resources that you guys can check out. Again, a lot of these resources are things that I mentioned before, moz.com, hubspot.com, Neil Patel was one I think I mentioned before. For Tag Manager and things like that, you will have to get a little bit more technical, like I mentioned. SEMrush has a good guide to how to install that and set that up. Search Engine Journal has some good stuff for Google Analytics and Google Data Studio as well. And then there's also some Data Studio templates you can get just to kind of make things easy for you as well. So with that, I will go ahead and kind of turn it over to questions that you guys might have. I know there was like I said, you probably got to this end of this presentation and feel like your head's spinning because there's like a ton of new information that's being thrown at you. So it's totally okay if you don't have any questions right now. I'm sure guys will probably think of some afterwards. But if you do have any questions that have arisen during the presentation, feel free to either drop them in the chat or you can send them to Andy in email. And I think Andy might have to move you guys over into panelists in order to share questions.
Okay, I'm going through allowing everybody to be able to talk. You just have to